You are standing in the center of the Iranian plateau. It is high noon, sometime in the middle of the 6th century BC. The sun here does not merely shine. It exerts a physical weight, pressing down on the shoulders of the Zagros Mountains to your west and the vast, salt-encrusted deserts of the Dashti Kavir to your east. The air is incredibly dry. If you were to run your hand over the soil at your feet, you would find it baked into a pale, crumbling crust, hot enough to sting your skin. There is a silence here that is absolute. A silence composed of heat shimmering off the horizon and the absence of wind. In this landscape, water is not just a resource. It's a deity, a miracle, and a ghost. It is there, but it is hidden. To understand the garden, the paradisa, the walled enclosure from which we derive our word paradise, you must first understand the hostility of the world outside the wall. You must understand the thirst. The garden is not natural here. It is a deliberate, defiant act of engineering against a climate that wishes to desiccate everything to dust. Walk with me now, moving away from the flat plains and toward the foothills of the mountains. The incline is gentle, almost imperceptible, but your legs feel the change. The color of the earth shifts from a bleached beige to a rockier, iron-tinged gray. You are looking for the source of the garden's life, and to find it, you must look for a series of peculiar markers. Ahead of you, stretching in a straight line across the desolate slope, like the buttons on a coat, are mounds of earth. They are circular, crater-like rings of piled dirt spaced roughly 20 to 30 meters apart. They look like giant anthills. These are the surface signatures of the Kanat, the ancient subterranean aqueduct system that makes civilization possible in this arid zone.
Ow.
Let us approach one of these mounds. As you step up to the rim of the crater and look down, you are peering into the dark throat of the earth. A vertical shaft drops straight down, cutting through layers of sediment, gravel, and clay. Depending on where we are on the slope, this shaft might be 10 meters deep, or it might be 100 meters deep. If you listen very closely, leaning your head over the lip of the shaft, ignoring the rush of blood in your own ears, you might hear it. A faint rhythmic clink. 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 Down there in the cool, suffocating dark, a man is working. He is a Mukani, a professional well-digger, a member of a guild as old as the empire itself. He is working by the light of a flickering castor oil lamp, crouching in a tunnel barely large enough for his shoulders. He is chipping away at the hard alluvium with a short-handled pickaxe. The Kanat is a masterpiece of passive engineering. The concept is deceptively simple, yet the execution requires a precision that rivals modern surveying. The goal is to tap into the water table deep beneath the mountains where snow melt and rain have seeped into the aquifer and transport that water horizontally to the arid plains kilometers away. Without using a single pump or machine, it relies entirely on gravity. Imagine the geometry. The Mukani must dig a tunnel that slopes downward, but only slightly. If the tunnel is too steep, the water will rush too fast, eroding the walls and collapsing the tunnel, burying the diggers alive. If the tunnel is too flat, the water will stagnate, silt will accumulate, and the flow will cease. The perfect gradient, passed down through generations of master diggers, is often cited as 1 to 1,000. For every 1,000 meters of horizontal distance, the tunnel drops only 1 meter. This creates a gentle, glassy flow, a silent river moving through the dark intestines of the earth. You can feel the coolness radiating up from the shaft. This vertical hole is primarily for ventilation, allowing the diggers to breathe and providing a way to hoist the excavated spoil up to the surface in leather buckets. That spoil forms the ring mound you are standing on. Let us move down the line of mounds, following the underground river toward the plains. You are walking above the water, tracking its invisible path. The sun is still beating down, the temperature hovering near 40 degrees Celsius, but you know that 50 meters beneath your sandals, water is flowing at a cool, constant 15 degrees. This journey of the water can take kilometers. Some Kanats run for 40, 50 kilometers, snaking from the mountain aquifers to the city. It is a journey of darkness. The water touches no sunlight, loses no volume to evaporation, and remains pure, filtered by the very earth it travels through. Eventually, the slope of the land meets the slope of the tunnel. The ground levels out. You see a change in the landscape ahead. The dusty monochrome of the desert is interrupted by a slash of vibrant, shocking green. It looks like a mistake in the painting. It is a high mud brick wall, plastered smooth, rising perhaps 4 meters high. Above the wall, the tops of cypress trees sway gently, dark green exclamation points against the pale blue sky. This is the destination. This is the Paradisa. We approach the entrance. It is not a grand gate, but a modest door of heavy walnut wood, studded with iron to repel termites and battering rams. You push it open. The transition is immediate and physical. It is a sensory shock. The first thing that hits you is the temperature drop, is instant, a reduction of 10 to 15 degrees. The searing radiant heat of the desert floor is cut off by the shade of the walls and the trees. The second thing is the sound. The silence of the desert is replaced by a low, constant vibration, the sound of water. And the third is the smell. The dust is gone, replaced by the scent of wet clay, damp moss, jasmine, and the resinous temps of pine and cypress. You are standing in the vestibule, a small transition space that forces you to pause before entering the garden proper. Your eyes adjust from the blinding glare outside to the dappled shade within. Now, step forward. The water you followed from the mountains emerges here. The Kanat Tunnel, having traveled its long dark journey, finally breaches the surface. This point of emergence is called the Madsar. It does not burst forth like a geyser. That would be vulgar. That would be a waste. In the Persian garden, water is precious, and it is treated with a reverence that borders on worship. The water slides smoothly out of a stone mouth, often carved in the shape of a lion or a simple geometric spout, and pours into a wide rectangular basin. The surface of the basin is like a mirror of black obsidian. The water is deep, but the bottom is lined with dark blue or turquoise tiles, giving the liquid a heavy, jewel-like quality. It reflects the sky, bringing the heavens down to the earth. This is a deliberate design choice. By reflecting the sky, the garden expands vertically, creating a sense of infinite space within the enclosure. Watch the water as it spills from this central basin. It enters a channel, a straight stone-lined rill called a jewy. This is where the cleverness of the design reveals itself. You're looking at a flat surface, or so it seems, but the water is moving. The engineers have graded the garden floor with the same subtle precision as the Kanat diggers. The water flows down the jewy, shimmering over carved stone slabs. These slabs are cut with a pattern known as sinacab, or breast of the partridge. The stone is chiseled into a scalloped texture, like fish scales or small waves. As the shallow sheet of water passes over these ripples, it breaks and chatters. It catches the sunlight, sparkling like crushed diamonds. This texture serves two purposes. Visually, it makes a small amount of water look like a rushing torrent. The Persians, masters of scarcity, knew how to maximize the sensory impact of every drop. Audibly, the rippled stone turns the silent flow into a gurgling melody. The garden sings. Walk alongside the channel. To your left and right are the trees. They are planted in strict military rows. The Persian garden is not a place of wild romantic nature. It is a place of order. It is the imposition of geometry upon chaos. The trees are chosen for specific roles. The tall, evergreen cypress, the sarv, presents eternity.
Right.
It stands straight and unbending, a symbol of the male form and of immortality. Next to the cypress, you will often see a fruit treon, almond, a plum, or a pomegranate. These are deciduous. They blossom, they bear fruit, they lose their leaves, and they sleep. They represent the cycle of life, the female form, the spring and the winter. Together, the cypress and the fruit tree symbolize the wholeness of existence. See them planted in pairs along the watercourse. The eternal and the ephemeral, standing side by side, their roots drinking from the same jewy. The air here is humid. This is the microclimate effect. The high walls trap the cool air generated by the evaporation of the water and the transpiration of the leaves. In the heat of the Iranian summer, a garden like this acts as a massive natural air conditioner. The temperature difference is so stark that nobility would migrate to these gardens during the height of summer, living in pavilions that float like islands in this sea of green. Continue walking. The channel leads you toward the center of the garden. You begin to realize the layout. The water does not wander randomly. It creates a cross. You're seeing the Chahar Bog the Four Gardens. This is the foundational archetype of Persian landscape design, a blueprint that will eventually travel west to Spain and east to India. The garden is a large square, divided by 4 water channels that meet in a central pool. This is not merely an aesthetic choice, it is a cosmological map. It represents the 4 quarters of the universe, the 4 cardinal directions, the 4 elements earth, water, air, fire, and the 4 rivers of paradise, mentioned in ancient texts, rivers of water, milk, wine, and honey. You reach the center. Here, the channels converge into a large square pool. In the middle of this pool stands a small pavilion, a kush. It is an open-sided structure with a domed roof, supported by slender wooden columns. You step onto the stone causeway and enter the pavilion. It is shaded and breezy. The water surrounds you on all sides. The reflection of the water dances on the painted ceiling of the pavilion, shimmering waves of light that make the solid architecture feel weightless. Sit for a moment on the low stone bench inside the pavilion. Place your hand on the stone. It is cool. From this vantage point, you can see the genius of the irrigation.
The water channels are not just decorative, they're the arteries of the garden.
Smaller sluice gates carved from stone or wood can be opened or closed to divert water from the main Jewy into the sunken flower beds, the carts. These beds are sunken for a reason. By planting the flowers, roses, tulips, violets, below the level of the walkways, the roots are closer to the water table, retaining moisture. But more importantly, when you sit here in the pavilion, the sunken beds mean that the carpet of flowers is at eye level. You do not look down at the roses. Look across a sea of them. The scent is overpowering. The damask rose, cultivated here for centuries, releases its oils in the heat of the afternoon. The smell mixes with the damp earth. It is important to remember that this tranquility is a product of constant vigilance. If the Mukani in the mountains stops clearing the silt from the tunnel, the water stops. If the gardener stops pruning the cypress, the order turns to chaos. If the walls crumble, the desert wind will blow in the salt and the sand, and within a few years, this paradise will be erased. The Persian garden is a held breath. It is a moment of pause in a harsh world. Look down into the central pool again. The water is dark, tranquil, but there is movement. Small fish, kept to eat the mosquito larvae, dart in the shadows. And there, near the edge, the water is disturbed by a fountain. This is not the high-jetting fountain of Europe, pumping water high into the air to fight gravity. That requires pressure that the cannot easily provide. Instead, this is a bubbler. The water wells up from a submerged pipe, breaking the surface in a gentle boiling motion. It is called a joush. The jows represents the spring of life, the eternal source. It creates a concentric ripple that travels outward, eventually hitting the square edges of the pool and bouncing back, creating a mesmerizing interference pattern. You watch the ripples. You listen to the low hum of the water moving through the stone channels. The harsh, blinding reality of the plateau outside the walls feels a million miles away. Here, time seems to slow down. The grid of the garden controls your movement, controls your view, and ultimately controls your mind. It forces you to slow your pace. You cannot run here. The paths are designed for strolling, for contemplation. As the sun begins to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows from the cypress trees across the turquoise tiles, you notice the light changing. The harsh white glare turns to a soft gold. The birds begin to sing nightingales, hiding in the dense foliage of the pomegranate trees. You are witnessing the transition from the day garden to the night garden. The mechanics of the space are about to shift again. The stone, which has absorbed the sun's heat all day, will soon begin to release it, keeping the garden warm as the desert temperature plummets. The white flowers, jasmine and tuberoses, which have been visually quiet during the bright day, will soon begin to glow in the moonlight and release their strongest scents. But that is for later. For now, you simply sit in the kushke, surrounded by the 4 rivers, listening to the clever, gentle hum of a machine built of water and gravity. You are at the heart of the Chahar Bog. You are safe. The desert cannot touch you here. This is the foundation. But to truly understand how this sanctity was achieved, and how it evolved from a simple necessity into an art form that defined an empire, we must look backward. We must leave this mature garden and travel back in time to the very first attempt to scratch a geometric paradise into the dust. We must go to Pasargudi. The lushness of the mature garden we just explored dissolves. The turquoise tiles fade into the gray of raw clay. The tall cypress trees retract into the earth. The wooden pavilion disintegrates into dust. We are traveling backward through time, stripping away centuries of refinement to find the skeleton of the idea. The air grows hotter, if that is possible. The timeline unspools, rushing back past the Islamic conquests, past the Sassanid glory, past the Parthian interlude, until we land with a heavy dusty thud in the middle of the 6th century BC. You are now standing on the plain of Merghab, in the heart of Fars province. It is a high, windswept plateau, surrounded by jagged, bone-colored mountains that look like the spine of some dormant leviathan. This is Pasargadi. It does not look like a city in the way you might imagine Babylon or Rome. There are no cramping tenement blocks, no narrow, winding alleys, reeking of refuse. Instead, there is space. Immense, terrifying space. The buildings here are not clustered together for protection. They're scattered across the plain like jewels tossed onto a beige carpet. We are here to witness the birth of the Chahora Bog. We are here to see the work of Cyrus too, a man history will call the Great. But we are not looking for his armies or his golden chariots. We are looking for his ditches. Walk with me toward the center of the plain. The ground is hard, scattered with tufts of camel thorn. Ahead you see the gleaming white limestone of a palace. This is known to archaeologists as Palace P, but do not look at the columns yet. Look at the ground. Tracing a line across the earth, cutting through the dust with surgical precision, is a channel of white stone. Kneel down beside it. The craftsmanship is startling. This is not the mud-lined ditch of a farmer. This is imperial architecture applied to irrigation. The channel is formed from blocks of limestone, each one cut to fit the next with a tightness that defies a knife blade. The channel itself is narrow, perhaps only 25 to 30 centimeters wide, and roughly the same depth. It is intimate. It is not a canal for barges. It is a vein for water. Run your hand along the rim of the stone. It is smooth, polished by the sand and the wind of 25 centuries. But originally, it was polished by the hands of masons. These stones were quarried from the nearby hills, hauled here on sledges, and dressed until they gleamed like marble. Follow the line of the stone channel. It moves straight, an arrow of white against the brown earth. Every 13 or 14 meters, the straight line is interrupted. The channel widens into a square basin, carved from a single block of limestone. These basins are the punctuation marks of the system. They measure roughly a meter square. When the water flowed here, it would rush along the narrow conduit, speeding up, and then spill into the basin. The water would swirl, slow down, deposit any lingering silt, and then pour out the other side to continue its journey. Close your eyes and imagine the acoustic effect. Rush, swirl, pause. A rhythmic heartbeat of fluid moving across the dry plain. This stone skeleton is all that remains of the first defined royal garden. But if you stand up and look at the layout, the ghost of the garden rises around you. Cyrus did not build a palace with a garden in the backyard. He built a garden and placed palaces inside it. This is a crucial distinction. The buildings Palace P, the residential palace, and Palace S, the audience hall are merely pavilions floating in a sea of irrigated green. The total area of this garden system is debated, but the central garden hall connected to Palace P stretches for nearly 300 meters. It is vast. Walk along the primary axis. You are walking the center line of the empire. To Cyrus, this garden was not just a place to relax. It was a microcosm of the order he had brought to the world. Outside the walls was chaos, nomadism, war, and heat. Inside the geometric lines of these stone channels was Shoth, order, and righteousness. The planting here would have been experimental. Remember, this is the beginning. The Persians were collecting trees like they collected kingdoms. As the armies of Cyrus moved west into Lydia and Ionia or east toward Bactria, they sent back seeds and saplings. Imagine young pomegranate trees, their leaves a glossy, leathery green, planted in neat rows parallel to the white stone channels. Imagine vines perhaps brought from the conquered lands of the Levant, trained onto trellises to create tunnels of shade. The contrast would have been visually violent, The blinding white of the limestone channels, the dark, wet soil of the beds, and the vibrant green of the foliage, all set against the parched brown backdrop of the Zagros Mountains. We approach Palace P. The relationship between the stone water channels and the architecture is seamless. The channels do not stop at the building's edge. They run along the sides, framing the structure. The palace itself is an open affair. It is not a fortress. It is a hypo-style hall of forest of tall stone columns supporting a high wooden roof. But the walls are not solid. They're vast porticos, open to the air. Step into the shadow of the portico. The floor is paved with stone, black and white, contrasting with the garden outside. The design forces you to look out. There is no clear division between inside and outside. The garden flows into the hall. The hall extends into the garden. The king would sit here on a high throne, the breeze blowing through the columns. And what would he see? He would not see a wall. He would see the water channels stretching out, leading the eye to the horizon. It is said that Cyrus was personally involved in the design and even the planting of his gardens. The Greek historian Xenophon, writing centuries later, tells a story of a Spartan general named Lysander who visited a Persian prince Cyrus the Younger, a descendant of the great Cyrus. Lysander was shown the garden, the Paradisa. He was astonished by the straightness of the rows, the regularity of the planting, the sweetness of the scents, and the geometric perfection. He exclaimed that the man who designed it must be a genius. The Persian prince smiled and replied, "I designed it. I measured it. And some of these trees I planted with my own hands." The Spartan was shocked. He looked at the Persian's purple robes, his gold jewelry, his soft hands, and could not believe that a king would dig in the dirt. But to the Persian mind, there is no contradiction. To rule is to cultivate. To be a king is to be a gardener. The word for king and the word for gardener share a conceptual root in the idea of protection and fostering growth. Let us move away from the palace now, following the water network deeper into the park. The archaeology here becomes a game of connecting dots. We find a fragment of a stone channel here, a broken basin there, but the scale is undeniable. This was not just a flower garden, it was a hunting park. The outer reaches of the Paradisa would have been enclosed by mud brick walls, encompassing acres of land. Here, lions, boars, and bears would be kept. The transition from the formal, geometric garden near the palace to the wilder hunting park was likely gradual. The stone channels would give way to earthen ditches, fruit trees would give way to planes and poplars, and then to the scrub of the natural plains, but enclosed, protected. This is where the word paradise gains its complexity. It is a spectrum. At the center is the Chahor Bagh, the fourfold garden of perfect order. At the edges is the wild, but a tamed wild, a wild that exists at the pleasure of the king. Stand for a moment by one of the stone basins. It is dry now, filled with the dust of millennia, but look closely at the interior corners. They are not sharp right angles, they're rounded, smoothed. Why? Because sharp corners trap dirt. Sharp corners create turbulence. The Persian engineers knew that for the water to remain pure and the flow to remain silent, the path must be smooth. They sanded the stone down to reduce friction. This obsession with the behavior of water suggests a deep, almost spiritual observation of liquid dynamics. They watched how water moved over stones in the mountain streams, and they replicated it in limestone. The sun is beating down on the plain of Murghab. It is a harsh, relentless light. You can feel the heat radiating off the white stone columns of the distant palace. It is easy to understand why the garden was necessary. Without it, this place is uninhabitable. With it, it is the center of the world. Imagine the soundscape of Pasargadae in 540 BC. You would hear the wind, always the wind, whistling through the valley. You would hear the flapping of the heavy fabric awnings draped between the columns of the palace. You would hear the low murmur of courtiers speaking Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian. But cutting through it all, a constant low-frequency thread was the sound of the water in the limestone channels. Gurgle, splash, silence. Gurgle, splash, silence. It was a sound that signaled wealth. To waste water on aesthetics in a desert is the ultimate display of power. When ambassadors from distant lands came to pay tribute to Cyrus, they were walked through this garden. Before they saw the gold, before they saw the immortals with their spears, they saw the water. They saw the impossible green. They were meant to be intimidated not by weapons, but by horticulture. If a king can command the water to flow in straight lines across a desert, what can he do to a rebellion? If he can make roses grow in the dust, what can he do to a city? We continue our walk following the axis away from the palaces. The ground here is uneven, marked by the mounds of unexcavated ruins. But the alignment holds. You're walking along a line that points directly toward the tomb of Cyrus, a kilometer away. The garden connects the living king to the dead king. The water flows between them. As we walk this dusty path, notice the irrigation technology that makes the stone channels possible. The limestone rills are the visible veins, but the heart is buried. Pasargadae relied on the Pulvar River, which flows nearby. To bring the water here, the engineers built dams. Not the massive concrete dams of the modern era, but diversion dams made of earth and brushwood that raise the water level just enough to feed the intake of the canals. These canals were broad, earthen arteries that carried the water from the river to the edge of the royal precinct. There it was decanted into the stone system. The maintenance required for this was staggering. We must imagine an army of silent workers. Men sweeping the stone channels every morning to remove the wind-blown sand. Men walking the earthen banks of the feeder canals, checking for leaks. Men adjusting the sluice gate's simple wooden boards slotted into grooves in the stone too. Balance the flow between the residential palace and the audience hall. It was a machine that required constant human energy to keep running. Let us sit for a moment on the base of a fallen column. The stone is cool in the shadow, hot in the sun. The design we see here at the Chohorbag, the four-part garden, is in its infancy. At Pasargadae, the geometry is present, but it is elongated. It is not yet the perfect square cross we will see later in Isfahan or India. Here, the rectangles are long and narrow, but the elements are all here. The integration of building and landscape, the use of water as a mirror, the dominance of the central axis. This is the prototype. This is the moment the idea was born. As the sun begins to set over the Zagros Mountains, the limestone channels of Pasargadae turn a soft pink. The shadows of the few remaining walls stretch out, long and dark, mimicking the rows of trees that once stood here. The temperature begins to drop rapidly. This is the desert cycle. The heat vanishes, replaced by a biting chill. In the time of Cyrus, this was the hour when the braziers would be lit. Large metal dishes filled with aromatic woods, cedar would be set along the porticos. The firelight would reflect in the water of the stone basins, creating dancing stars in the dark. The garden at night was a different world. The visual geometry faded into darkness, replaced by the olfactory geometry of scent. The night-blooming flowers would open. The sound of the water would seem louder in the stillness. We are leaving Pasargadae now. We are leaving the white stone in the first great experiment. We must move forward in time. The empire of Cyrus will fall, burned by Alexander, but the garden will survive. The idea will travel. It will go underground, like the Kanat water, surfacing in new dynasties, in new forms. We travel forward now, skipping over centuries of turmoil, to a time when the garden evolves from a royal statement of power into a philosophical and spiritual sanctuary. We are moving toward the medieval era, where the garden becomes a book to be read. The water remains, but the meaning deepens. Feel the ground shift beneath your feet. The dusty plain of Pasargadae recedes. The white limestone dissolves. We are moving toward a new material, brick. We are moving toward a new geometry, the perfect square. We are moving toward the golden age of the Persian garden. The white limestone of Pasargadae has vanished into the haze of history. The open plains, where a king could draw a line to the horizon, are gone. We have moved forward, and we have moved inward. You are now standing in a labyrinth. It is the 11th century, or perhaps the 12th. We are in the era of the great Seljuks, or the Ilkhanids, or the Timurids. The specific dynasty matters less than the shift in the texture of the world. We are in a city now, perhaps Yazd, perhaps Kashan, perhaps Ray. The ground beneath your feet is no longer the natural crust of the plateau. It is beaten earth, packed hard by the passage of thousands of feet, donkeys, and carts. are in a narrow alleyway, a kutch. The walls on either side of you rise high, 5 or 6 meters, blocking out the sun, except for a strip of blinding blue sky directly overhead. These walls are not made of cut stone. They are made of the earth itself. They are keshed, sun-dried mud brick-coated with a layer of kagel. Stop and look closely at the surface of the wall next to you. Kagel is a mixture of mud and straw. The straw acts as a binding agent, preventing the mud from cracking as it dries in the fierce heat, much like rebar in modern concrete. The color is a warm, dusty ochre, the color of toast. It looks primitive, but it is a sophisticated insulator. Place your hand against the wall. It is warm, absorbing the solar radiation, holding it back. These walls are thick, sometimes a meter deep. They are a thermal battery. They protect the interior from the scorching noon and release that stored heat during the freezing desert night. But more importantly, they protect the secret. Walk down the alley. It is winding, designed to break the line of sight and the force of the wind. It is dusty. The air smells of dry earth, donkey manure, and the faint acrid smoke of a bread oven. It is a hostile, monochromatic world. There is no green here, no water, just the endless, imposing walls. This is the principle of Batten and Zahir, the inner and the outer. In Persian culture of this era, the exterior is a shell, tough and unassuming. The interior is the soul, the hidden jewel. The garden has retreated behind the veil. You come to a door. It is small, set into a recessed arch within the mud wall. It is made of heavy wood, weathered to a silver gray. There are 2 metal door knockers. One is shaped like a hammer, heavy and solid. This is for men. The other is a ring, light and circular. This is for women. It produces a higher, lighter clack. The residents inside know the gender of the visitor by the sound of the knock. We do not knock. We push the door open and step inside. You are not in the garden yet. You're in the hashtai, the vestibule. It is a small, octagonal room, capped with a domed ceiling. It is dark and cool. The floor is paved with brick. There are stone benches built into the walls. This is the airlock. This is where you leave the dust of the street behind. The architecture forces you to pause, to adjust your eyes, to lower your voice. The passage from the hashtai is never straight. You must turn a corner. This is for privacy. Even if the door is open, no one from the street can see into the sanctuary. You turn the corner, and the world changes. The ochre monotony of the alley is shattered. You are hit by a kaleidoscope of color and light. You have entered the courtyard garden. The scale is smaller than Pasargadi, more intimate, but the geometry has been perfected. We are looking at the classic Chahar Bagh in its theological maturity. The ground is paved not with dirt, but with bricks laid in intricate herringbone patterns. In cutting through the brick, bisecting the space into 4 perfect quadrants, are the water channels. But look at the channels now. They are no longer simple white limestone. They are lined with tiles. This is the great innovation of the era. The introduction of glazed ceramic into the hydraulic architecture. The color is specific. It is turquoise firusa, annealed down by the edge of the channel. The water is shallow, perhaps only 10 centimeters deep, but the blue tiles on the bottom make it look infinite. They trick the eye. They mimic the depth of the ocean and the expanse of the sky. The chemistry of this blue is a story of trade and geology. The glaze is created using copper oxides, fired in kilns at precise temperatures to achieve that specific blue-green hue that vibrates against the beige of the mud brick. It is the color of water, even when the water is not there. In the desert, blue is the rarest color. To line your garden with it is a psychological balm. It cools the mind before the water cools the skin. The water in the channels is moving, but slowly. The incline here is even more subtle than on the slopes of the mountains. The water glides over the blue tiles like a sheet of glass. It feeds into a central pool, which is now a perfect square or a rectangle, echoing the shape of the courtyard.
Ow.
Let us look at the planting. It has evolved into a strict hierarchy, a 3-tiered system of agriculture and shade. Look up. The top layer is the canopy. The Oriental Plains. They are massive, their trunks thick and mottled, their bark peeling away in gray and cream patches like camouflage. Their leaves are broad, like maples. They are the umbrella. They're planted to block the high sun, protecting everything beneath them. Below the chinar, in the dappled light, is the second layer, the fruit trees. You see pomegranates, with their gnarled, twisting branches and glossy leaves. In the spring, they burn with bright red flowers. In the autumn, they hang heavy with leathery red orbs. You see mulberry trees, figs, apricots. This is a crucial detail. The Persian garden is not merely ornamental, it's productive. It is an agricultural machine. The shade of the chinar prevents the sun from scorching the fruit. The fruit trees, in turn, provide shade for the third layer. Look at the ground. The third layer is the carpet. Here, closest to the water, are the flowering shrubs and ground covers. The damask rose is king here, planted in dense clusters. There is jasmine climbing up the trunks of the trees. There are violets and irises. This three-layer system creates a dense, humid microclimate. The moisture trapped under the canopy of the chinar trees is held there, unable to evaporate quickly into the dry sky. When you stand here, you are breathing air that has been filtered through 3 layers of vegetation. It is oxygen, rich, humid, and scented. Walk along the blue-tiled channel toward the center. The geometry you are walking through is now heavily laden with spiritual meaning. In the centuries since Cyrus, Islam has come to Persia, and with it, a new layer of symbolism has settled over the landscape. The garden is no longer just a royal park. It is a physical manifestation of the Quranic paradise. The word Jannah in the Quran means garden. The scriptures describe 4 rivers: water, milk, wine, and honey. The 4 channels of the Chehar Bagh are a direct representation of these rivers. The central pool where they meet represents the Hod al-Kathor, the basin of abundance, the meeting point of man and the divine. When a Persian mystic or poet of this arrays, think of Rumi or Hafez, sat in a garden like this, they were not just sitting in a backyard, they were sitting inside a mandala. The intersection of the water channels represents the meeting of the horizontal axis, the material world, and the vertical axis, the spiritual connection to God. Sit on the edge of the central pool. The tiles here might be a deeper blue, perhaps cobalt, derived from the mines of Kashan. The water is still. Look at the reflection. See the chinar trees, the clouds, the arch of the Iwan, the vaulted hall of the house behind you. This concept of reflection is central to the Sufi philosophy that permeated this era. The material world is seen as merely a reflection of the divine truth. The garden is a mirror. By contemplating the reflection in the water, you are contemplating the nature of reality itself. The image in the water is real, yet not real, just as our lives are real, yet transient. The silence here is different from the silence of the desert. It is a thick silence. The high mud walls block the noise of the city. You cannot hear the merchant shouting, the dogs barking, or the iron wheels of carts. You hear only the garden. Listen, you hear the rustle of the plane tree leaves. They are large and dry, and they make a specific paper-like sound when the breeze moves them. You hear the water. Here the engineers might have installed a small fountain, a single jet rising from the center of the pool. It does not roar, it murmurs. You hear the bees. The density of the flowers attracts them in the thousands. Their hum is a constant low-frequency vibration that underpins the audio landscape. This isolation is the point. The walled garden is a fortress of peace. It is a rejection of the chaos outside. Let us examine the architecture that surrounds the garden. In this enclosed courtyard model, the house and the garden are one organism. The rooms of the house open directly onto the garden. There are no hallways in the Western sense. To go from the bedroom to the kitchen, you might have to walk through the garden. The most important architectural feature facing the garden is the talker or the awan. This is a vaulted space open on one side facing the water. It is a room with only 3 walls. Walk into the awan. The floor is raised a few steps above the garden level. The ceiling is high, covered in complex geometric stucco work stalactites of plaster known as muqarnas. These intricate honeycombs catch the light and break it up, creating a sense of infinite complexity overhead. The Iwan is the primary living space during the summer. It is deep enough to be in permanent shade. The air cooled by the garden flows into this pocket. Sit here on carpets, leaning against bolsters, drinking tea from small glass cups. The tea is amber-colored, sweetened with a cube of hard sugar held between the teeth. The steam curls up, joining the dry air. Notice the interaction of light and shadow. The Persian architects were masters of shadow. They knew that in a land of blinding light, shadow is the ultimate luxury. They designed the walls and the trees to cast specific shadows at specific times of the day. In the morning, the sun hits the west wall, lighting up the turquoise tiles. The east side of the garden is in cool shade. At noon, the sun is overhead, but the chinar trees spread their canopy, dappling the floor with leopard spots of light. In the afternoon, the light turns golden and hits the east wall, warming the bricks for the coming night. And the night is when the garden truly transforms. Let us wait here as the sun goes down. The sky turns from a bleached denim to a deep, bruising purple, and then to black. The stars emerge sharp, distinct pinpricks in the clear desert air. The temperature plummets. The heat stored in the mud brick walls begins to radiate outward, creating a gentle warmth that embraces the garden. The scent of the garden changes. The heat of the day has vaporized the essential oils in the rose petals and the jasmine. Now, as the air cools, that scent hangs heavy and low, trapped by the walls. It is intoxicatingly sweet. The water in the pool becomes a black mirror. The moon rises. In the center of the pool, the reflection of the moon floats, perfectly still. This image, the moon in the pool, is one of the most enduring metaphors in Persian poetry. It represents the beloved god coming down to visit the lover, the soul. The garden at night is a place of poetry. This is not a figure of speech. It was the literal setting for the recitation of the ChronoMora, or the divan of Hafiz. Lanterns would be placed in niches in the walls, casting a flickering orange glow that competed with the moonlight. But there is a practical side to this beauty, one that we must not forget. This paradise requires a skeleton. Behind the walls, unseen by the poet, are the mechanics. There are ceramic pipes bush-buried under the brick paving. These pipes carry wastewater away or distribute fresh water to the roots of the trees. The trees themselves require pruning. The gardener must climb the chinar trees to trim the dead wood. The rose bushes must be dead-headed. The tiles must be scrubbed of algae. The mud walls require constant maintenance. Every year, before the winter rains, a new layer of coggill must be applied to the roof and the tops of the walls. If this is not done, the water will seep into the raw brick, dissolving it, and the wall will slump and collapse. The garden is a living entity that is constantly dying. It is only kept alive by the will of its owner. We are now standing in the synthesis of engineering, agriculture, and theology. The rough experimentation of Pasargadi has been refined into a jewel box. The scale has shifted from the imperial horizon to the domestic sanctuary. But the evolution is not over. The garden is about to expand again. The concepts perfected in these small walled courtyards are about to be blown up to the scale of a city. We are moving toward the zenith of the Persian garden. We are moving toward a time when a Shah will decide to turn his entire capital into a garden. We are moving toward the 17th century, to the reign of Shah Abuz and the magnificent city of Isfahan. But before we go there, we must understand the bridge between the intimate and the monumental. We must look at how these gardens survived the Mongol invasions, how they were preserved in the hearts of the people when the cities were burning. We must look at the garden as a symbol of resistance. Feel the cool night air of the 12th century settle on your skin. Smell the jasmine. Listen to the water trickling over the turquoise tiles. The world outside the wall is turbulent. Armies are marching. Dynasties are crumbling. But inside the square, under the plane trees, the water flows in a perfect line, and the order holds. The tranquility of the walled courtyard fractures. The blue tiles vibrate, then crack. The sound of the gentle water is drowned out by the thundering of hooves, hundreds of thousands of them. We are moving into the era of the great disruptions. We are stepping into the 13th and 14th centuries. The history books will tell you this is the time of the Mongol invasions, the time of Genghis Khan, and later Timur Tamerlane. They will tell you of pyramids of skulls and cities leveled to the ground. But we are not here for the skulls. We are here for the water. And the tragedy of this era is not just the burning of libraries. It is the destruction of the Khanats. When the Mongol armies swept across the Iranian plateau, they did not understand the invisible rivers flowing beneath their feet, or perhaps they understood them too well. To subdue a population in the desert, You do not need to fight them. You only need to break the qanat. Imagine the silence of a dying garden. The Mukani the well-digger is killed or fled. The tunnel silts up. The flow slows to a trickle, then stops. The basin of abundance dries into a cracked, dusty bowl. The chinar trees, which have stood for 100 years, turn brown and brittle. The desert reclaims the paradise. For a time, it seems the garden might go extinct. But the Persian garden is not merely a collection of plants. It is an idea. And ideas are harder to kill than trees. During this chaotic interlude, the garden migrates. It moves from the earth to the loom. Look at the ground beneath your feet. We are in a tent now, a massive structure of felt and silk, pitched on a high plain near Herat, or perhaps outside Samarkand. The year is roughly 1400. Look at the carpet you are standing on. Because the physical gardens were destroyed, the weavers of Persia began to knot the garden into wool and silk. The garden carpet is born. Look at the pattern. Do you see the grid? There is the central medallion that is the pool. There are the straight lines intersecting it. Those are the water channels. There are the stylized cypress trees, the weeping willows, the birds. For decades, the Persian gardens survived primarily as a textile. People sat on these carpets, drinking tea, sitting on a garden when they could not sit in one. They carried their paradise rolled up on the back of a camel. But now, the builder has returned. Timur, the lame conqueror, is a man of terrifying contradictions. He destroys Damascus, but he loves roses. He levels Baghdad, but he is obsessed with the geometry of shade. He moves the center of the Persianate world east to Samarkand. And here, he begins to build on a scale that makes the domestic courtyards of the previous section look like dollhouses. Timur does not build a garden. He builds a necklace of them around his capital. He gives them names that sound like poems: Bagi Del Gosha, the garden that delights the heart; Quay, Jahan Nama, the garden that shows the world; Bagi Behesht, the garden of paradise. Let us walk into one of these Timurid gardens. The first thing you notice is the absence of the high, fortress-like walls of the medieval city. We are outside the city limits now. These are suburban pleasure gardens. The walls are lower, sometimes merely markers of territory rather than defensive fortifications. The scale is immense. We're talking about enclosures that are a kilometer on each side. But the defining feature of this era is not the stone, nor the brick, nor the tile. It is the fabric. You are walking through a meadow of clover and wild tulips. The grass is kept high, not mown. This is a boggy tata, garden of levels, or a meadow garden. And rising from the green grass are the palaces. But they are not made of stone. They are made of silk. Timur and his descendants were nomads at heart. They did not like to be trapped inside stone boxes. They preferred to live in tents, but these were not the rough yurts of the steppe. Walk toward the royal pavilion. It is a tent the size of a cathedral. It is supported by 12 golden pillars. The fabric is a heavy crimson silk, embroidered with gold thread. It is held in place by ropes of multicolored silk, staked into the ground with pegs made of silver. The wind here plays a different instrument. Instead of the rustle of leaves against a mud wall, you hear the snap and flutter of thousands of square meters of heavy fabric. Thwack, flutter, snap. Inside the tent, the walls are lined with ermine and sable. The floor is covered with the garden carpets we saw earlier, garden on top of a garden. But where is the water? In the Timurid garden, the water is made to perform acrobatics, because these gardens were often built on the slopes of hills to take advantage of the breeze. The engineers had to manage the change in elevation. They turned a problem into a masterpiece. They invented the chadar. Walk out of the tent and look at the slope. The water channel does not just flow down, it falls. But a simple waterfall is too chaotic, too splashing. It wastes water. The chadar, which means veil or sheet in Persian, is a stone ramp set at a steep angle. The surface of the ramp is not smooth, it is carved with a pattern, usually a scallop shell pattern or a chevron design. The water flows over the top of the ramp and clings to the stone. As it rushes down the textured surface, it is broken up into thousands of tiny ripples. Stand at the bottom of the chadar. Look up. The water looks like a textured sheet of glass, or a piece of white lace sliding endlessly down. The sun hits the broken water and shatters into a million sparkles. And the sound, it is not a roar. It is a hiss. A white noise. It is designed to soothe the mind, to drown out the whispers of conspirators and the distant noise of the army camp. This control of water turning a vertical fall into a textured sheet is the bridge. Between the flat tranquility of the desert courtyard and the dramatic cascades we will see later in the Mughal gardens of India, which are the direct children of these Timurid creations. Let us sit on a low wooden divan near the chadar. God, the air here smells different. It is less about the heavy, trapped scent of roses and more about the fresh, green scent of crushed clover and flowing water. It is here, in this mobile, silken world, that we meet a man who will codify the garden for history. He is a young prince, a descendant of Timur. His name is Babur. He is not a gardener by trade. He is a warlord, a poet, and a diarist. He is arguably the most obsessive garden critic in history. Babur writes a memoir, the Babur-Nama. In it, he does not just list his battles. He lists his flowers. He counts the tulips, measures the height of the pomegranate trees. Imagine him standing here in the early 16th century. He is wearing a heavy coat, his breath visible in the cold air of Kabul or Herat. He is holding a string, a measuring line. He is annoyed. He has found a garden that is not symmetrical. The water channel is slightly crooked. Trees are not planted in perfect opposition. It offends him. To Babur and to the Persian aesthetic he embodies, a lack of symmetry is a moral failing. It represents a disordered mind. He orders his men to fix it. I ordered that the terrace be straightened, he writes. I ordered that the watercourse be made straight. Babur carries the seed of the Persian garden out of the plateau and down into the humid plains of India, where it will eventually bloom into the Taj Mahal. But his heart remains here, in the cool air of the high gardens. There is a specific detail in these gardens that shows the playful side of the design. It is called the floating pavilion. Walk with me to the center of the main pool. It is large, perhaps 50 meters across. In the center, there is a stone platform, but there is no bridge. How do you get there? You take a boat. Or, if the water is shallow enough, you are carried. This isolation is deliberate. When the prince sits on the central platform, surrounded by water, he is untouchable. No assassin can reach him without making a splash. No petitioner can grab his robe. He is an island. The water serves as a moat, a mirror, and an air conditioner. As the Timurid era stabilizes, the materials begin to shift again. The tents are gradually replaced by more permanent structures, but the lightness remains. The buildings are tall, with slender columns tall-armed of wood, often cut from the plane trees themselves. These columns are significant. In the old stone palaces of Pasargadi, the columns were massive, thick stumps of rock. Here, the wooden columns are thin, elegant pencils. They are often painted in bright colors, reds, greens, and golds, and topped with intricate muqarnas capitals. They look fragile, as if they are barely holding up the roof. This is the aesthetic of defying gravity. The roof seems to float above the garden. Let us watch the sunset in this Timurid pleasure park. The sun drops behind the mountains of Central Asia. The light hits the snow-capped peaks, turning them pink. In the garden, the servants are lighting the lamps. But these are not just simple clay lamps. In this era of luxury, they use colored glass. Red, blue, and green lanterns are hung in the trees. The effect is phantasmagoric. The trees look like they are bearing fruit of fire. Reflection in the pool becomes a smear of neon colors against the black water. The musicians begin to play. The tar, the kamancha. The music is intricate, mathematical, mirroring the geometry of the garden. This era, the 15th century, is the pivot point. The garden has survived the apocalypse of the Mongols. It has been packed into saddlebags and woven into carpets. It has been pitched as a tent on the steppe. It has proven that it is indispensable. A Persian ruler cannot exist without a garden. It is his badge of office. But the garden is still somewhat fragmented. It is either a small domestic courtyard or a sprawling, semi-nomadic camp. It has not yet been fully integrated into the urban fabric of a capital city on a monumental scale. That integration requires a unified empire. It requires a Shah who is not just a warlord but an architect of the state. As the night deepens and the silken city of tents glows under the moon, we can feel the change coming. the Timurids will fade. The Safavids will rise. The center of gravity will shift back west, to the heart of Iran, to a city in the desert that is about to become half the world. We are moving toward the climax of the story. We are moving toward the integration of the river, the street, the mosque, and the palace into one single flowing organism of water and shade. We are moving to Isfahan. But before we arrive at that destination, we must understand the final refinement of the water technology. We have seen the Qanat, the tunnel, and the Chadar, the waterfall. Next, we must understand the fall war, the fountain jetton, the pressure systems that allowed water to dance. The physics of the garden are about to get more complicated. Stand up from the divan. The silk tent flaps in the night breeze. The water hisses down the stone ramp. Take a deep breath of the cool clover-scented air. The journey continues. The silk of the Timurid tents has long since rotted away. The golden pillars have been melted down. The portable paradise, woven into carpets and pitched on hillsides, was a brilliant solution for a nomadic court. But it was ephemeral. It moved with the wind. We are now moving toward permanence. The timeline slides forward. We cross the threshold of the 16th century and land firmly in the year 1598. The location changes, shifting from the northern steppes back to the heart of the Iranian plateau. We are standing on the banks of a river. But this is not the scant seasonal stream of Pasargadi. This is the Zayande Rutha life-giving river. It is a miracle in the desert. A broad, muscular flow of snowmelt rushing down from the Zagros Mountains. It is unique in that it never reaches the sea. It flows bravely into the salt desert and dies there, sacrificing itself to the earth. We are in Isfahan. A new king has arrived. Shah Abbas I, the Safavid monarch, has decided to move his capital here. But he does not intend to simply build a palace in the city. He intends to rebuild the city as a garden. This distinction is vital. In the past, the garden was a retreat from the city-walled sanctuary. Abbas, working with his genius theologian architect Sheikh Bahai, decides to invert the paradigm. The city itself will become the paradisa. To understand this, we must walk the spine of his new creation. We are standing at the head of the Chaharabagh Avenue. This is not a street in the way you understand a street. It is a garden that has been stretched. It is a linear park, 50 meters wide and 6 kilometers long, running straight from the royal precinct down to the river, crossing it, and continuing up the slope to the royal pleasure gardens in the south. Walk with me down the center of this avenue. Under your feet is a path of crushed gravel and brick. To your left and right are water channels, the Mahdi. But unlike the small, trickling rills of the private courtyards, these are substantial canals. They are fed directly by the river upstream, diverted through a complex network of sluice gates that distribute the water throughout the city, like blood in a vascular system. Lining these canals are the trees. But these are not the random scatterings of the hunting park. These are the Chinar the Oriental, planes planted in quadruple rows. We must pause to appreciate the engineering of the planting. Sheikh Bahai knew that the soil here was salty and poor. To ensure these trees would create the canopy that Abbas demanded, the planting pits were dug 2 meters deep. At the bottom of each pit, the gardeners placed a layer of charcoal and ... coins. Yes, silver and copper coins. This was not a superstition. It was chemistry. The charcoal acted as a filter and a sponge, holding moisture and nutrients near the taproot. The metal coins, slowly oxidizing over decades, released trace minerals, copper and silver salts that acted as a fungicide, protecting the roots from rot in the damp earth. It worked. The trees of the Chahor Bog grew massive, their branches locking together overhead to form a tunnel of green. Even at high noon in July, when the surrounding desert is baking at 45 degrees Celsius, the temperature inside this tunnel is 10 degrees cooler. As you walk, you hear the sound of water. But it is not just the horizontal flow of the canals. Every few hundred meters, the avenue widens into a rectangular basin. And in the center of each basin, the water defies gravity. It shoots up into the air, creating a vertical column of spray that collapses back on itself with a refreshing crash. This is the fawwar of the fountain. A fountain is a banal object. You attach a pump to a pipe, plug it into electricity, and the water sprays. But in 1598, there is no electricity. There are no pumps. How, then, does the water jump 3 meters into the air? We must look underground to find the answer. We must look for the shoulder gallew. The term translates literally as the camel's throat. It is a piece of hydraulic wizardry, a specific shape of pipe that utilizes the principle of the inverted siphon. Imagine the water traveling from the high mountains, possesses potential energy. The engineers of Isfahan maintained this head of pressure by keeping the feeder canals high on the slope. When the water reached the garden, it was funneled into sealed pipes Danbush made of ceramic, or 4 high-pressure areas, lead. The pipe would slope down steeply, diving deep under the basin, then curve sharply upward, like the dip in a camel's neckbee, for narrowing into a brass nozzle at the surface. The weight of the water rushing down the slope behind it pushed the water in the nozzle upward. The shoulder gallew trap also served a secondary purpose. The deep U-bend trapped sediment and debris at the bottom of the curve, ensuring that the delicate nozzle didn't clog. A small hatch at the bottom of the U allowed maintenance workers to clear the muck without stopping the flow. This is the hidden heartbeat of Isfahan. Beneath the beautiful tilework and the gravel paths, there is a labyrinth of pressure, a constant thrumming hydraulic machine. As we continue down the avenue, notice the social change. In the old walled gardens, the only people allowed inside were the king, his harem, and his closest courtiers. It was a private paradise, but the Chahorbagh Avenue is public. Look around you. There are merchants resting their donkeys. There are poets reciting verses. There are Sufis in patched wool cloaks. And, significantly, there are women. While the harem remains secluded, the avenue itself is a promenade where the citizens of Isfahan come to see and be seen. To your right, you smell roasting coffee. This is a new innovation. The coffee house, the Kavakhana, has arrived. These establishments line the avenue, opening directly onto the gardens. Men sit on raised platforms, smoking water pipes, kalyan, the bubbling of the pipe echoing the bubbling of the fountains. The garden has become the living room of the city. We approach the river. The avenue does not stop. It leaps across the water. We are standing before the Sayosipal, the bridge of 33 arches. It is a masterpiece of multifunctional architecture. It is a bridge, yes, connecting the north bank to the south. But it is also a dam. Look at the lower arches. They are fitted with sliding stone gates. When these gates are closed, the water level upstream rises, feeding the irrigation channels for the royal gardens. When they are open, the water rushes through with a deafening roar. The bridge itself is a garden of stone, has wide promenades on 2 levels. The lower level is practically in the water, cool and shadowed, a place for summer afternoons. The upper level is open to the sky, a place for winter mornings. There are alcoves to jilt into the piers of the bridge. People sit in these niches, their feet dangling inches above the rushing water. The sound of the river here is amplified by the stone vaults, creating a resonating chamber of white noise that washes away the stress of the capital. Cross the bridge. We are entering the royal precinct of the southern bank, the Hazar Jarabeth, 1,000 acres. Here the terrain slopes upward. The engineers used this slope to create a cascade. Central water channel of the avenue transforms. It becomes a staircase of water. Every 10 meters, the water drops over a stone lip into the next basin. The lips are carved with the cinecab pattern we saw in the earliest gardens, the fish scale ripples, but here, they are larger, deeper. The water churns and froths. The air is filled with negative ions, that fresh, sharp smell you get after a thunderstorm. It is in this era, under Shah Abbas, that the pavilion in the garden reaches its aesthetic zenith. We stop at the Hasht Behesh, the 8 Paradises Pavilion. Creates a deliberate confusion between inside and outside. The building has no front door. It is open on all 4 sides. The garden flows right through the ground floor. A water channel enters the building from the north, pools in a marble basin in the center of the room, and exits to the south. If you stand in the center of the pavilion, look up. The ceiling is a kaleidoscope of mirror working carry. This is a new development. The Persians have begun importing glass mirrors from Venice, but the mirrors often broke during the long caravan journey across the mountains. Instead of throwing away the shards, the Persian artisans developed a technique to use them. They set the broken fragments into wet plaster in geometric patterns. The result is dazzling. The mirror mosaic reflects the water, the garden, and the light in 1,000 fractured angles. It deconstructs reality. You look up, you do not see your own face. You see a glittering abstraction of the world. It aligns perfectly with the Sufi mysticism of the time. The self is an illusion. Only the light of God is real. The Garden of Isfahan is a total sensory experience. It is designed to be consumed. There are the fruits, nectarines, apricots, quinces. The gardeners of Isfahan were famous for their grafting techniques, creating trees that bore two different types of fruit on the same branch. There are the flowers, the tulips of the mountains brought down and cultivated into new varieties. The narcissus, heavy and drooping, and there is the sound. We must not forget the birds. The Chahorbag was designed as an aviary. Pigeons were kept not just for their beauty, but for their dung, the most potent fertilizer for the melon fields. Specialized pigeon towers Kabatar Konadat, the landscape around the city, looking like chess rooks, housing thousands of birds that scour the gardens for insects. As the sun sets over Isfahan, the nature of the Chaharbagh changes. The daily bustle of commerce fades. The coffee houses light their lamps. The water in the long central canal turns into a dark ribbon reflecting the torches. This is the city of light, long before Paris claimed the title. Travelers from Europe Chardin, Tavernier wrote in astonishment about the illumination of Isfahan. They described thousands of lamps placed in niches along the canals, making the water look like a river of liquid fire. You are walking through the culmination of 2,000 years of design. The simple limestone channel of Cyrus the Great has become a sophisticated hydraulic grid. The defensive wall has become a public promenade. The hidden oasis has become a metropolis. But there is a vulnerability here. Isfahan relies on the delicate balance of the river and the administration that manages it. To distribute the water, Shah Abbas codified the Sheikh Baha'i Water Code. It was a complex legal document inscribed on stone, detailing exactly how many minutes of water flowed each neighborhood, each garden, and each farm received. Water was time. You didn't buy liters, you bought hours. If the administration fails, if the timekeepers become corrupt, if the Mirab, the water master, takes a bribe, the system collapses. The trees at the end of the line die first. For now, in the golden age of the 17th century, the system holds. The water rushes through the Chaux de Gallieu, the fountains dance, and the scent of wet dust and jasmine fills the avenue. But we must go deeper. We have seen the public face of the water, the grand avenue, and the river. We must retreat again back into the private sphere to see how this abundance transformed the domestic life of the elite. We need to enter the Chel Satoun, the palace of 40 columns. We need to see how water was used not just for cooling, but for optical illusion. And we need to look closely at the water itself. How did they keep it clean? How did they deal with the stagnation? The answers lie in the bottom of the pools, in the chemistry of the tiles, and in the hunger of the fish. Walk with me away from the noise of the bridge. Let's turn through a high gate into the silence of the royal reception hall. The night is cooling down. The reflection is waiting. The roar of the river at the bridge of 33 arches fades behind you. The sound of the public promenade, the laughter from the coffee houses, and the clip-clop of donkeys on the gravel avenue recede into a dull hum. We are moving deeper into the royal precinct. We are crossing the invisible line between the public spectacle of the Chahorbagh and the private theater of the Shah. You are standing before a high gate. The guards, dressed in the distinctive red caps of the Kizilbash, nod and pull the heavy doors open. The hinges are well oiled. They make no sound. You step inside. The scale changes instantly. The frantic energy of the city is cut off as if by a knife. You are facing the Chel Satoun, the palace of 40 columns. It is the mid-17th century, the reign of Shah Abbas II. The sun is low, casting long golden rays that skim parallel to the ground. This is the golden hour, not just a photographer's term, but a specific window of time the Persian architects calculated for. Before you lies a body of water so large it feels less like a pool and more like a captive lake. It is the Estakar. It stretches 110 meters long and 16 meters wide. Walk to the edge of the stone coping. Look across the water. At the far end, rising from a stone terrace, is the pavilion. It is a masterpiece of slender elegance. 20 wooden columns, tall and thin, support a massive, flat wooden roof. The columns are cut from single trunks of the chinar tree, stripped of bark and covered in a thin layer of plaster, then painted or mirrored. But wait, the name of the palace is Cella Sotun 40 columns. You count only 20. Look down. There in the dark glassy surface of the Estakar are the other 20. This is not an accidental reflection. It is the primary architectural feature. The garden is designed so that the building is incomplete without the water. The physical columns, the material world, and the reflected columns, the spirit world, join together to create the 40, a number that in Persian mysticism represents plenitude, maturity, and wisdom. To achieve this mirror, the water must be absolutely still. This presented a massive engineering challenge. The water in Isfahan is alive. It is constantly flowing from the river, through the gardens, and out to the farms. Flowing water ripples? Ripples destroy the mirror. How did they solve it? Kneel down and look at the edge of the pool. You will see that the water is not stagnant, but the movement is imperceptible. The engineers designed the inlet and outlet ports to be submerged deep below the surface. The water enters from the bottom, spreads slowly through the cold depths, and exits from the bottom at the far end. The surface tension remains unbroken. The top layer of the water is a sheet of glass, while the current moves silently beneath it. This is the laminar flow of the 17th century. But a pool this size, sitting under the baking sun of the Iranian plateau, is a biological time bomb. Algae, mosquito, larvae, and dust are the enemies of the reflection. To combat this, the garden relies on a biological cleaning crew. Look closely into the dark water. Shadows are moving. These are the carp. They're not the bright orange koi of Japan. These are dark, bottom-feeding fish, river monsters brought in from the Zayande Rood. They are the janitors. They scour the bottom and the sides of the pool, eating the algae before it can bloom. And for the surface, the dust. Imagine the bagban, the gardener. Early in the morning, before the king wakes, 2 men would stand on opposite sides of the pool. They would hold a long weighted rope made of silk and wool. They would lower it gently onto the surface of the water and walk the length of the pool, dragging the rope across the top. This action, called skimming the mirror, pulled the dust and dead insects to the far end, where the surface water spilled over a weir and was flushed away. It is a labor-intensive perfection. Let us walk around the perimeter of the pool toward the pavilion. As you approach, the optical illusion shifts. The reflected columns seem to elongate, stretching toward you. You reach the terrace. Columns here are not resting directly on the floor. They stand on stone plinths carved in the shape of lions. There are 4 lions for the central columns. Their mouths are open. In the time of the Shah, water was piped into these stone lions. Kessa. They would spit clear streams of water into the marble channels that run through the porch. But again, the sound was controlled. It was not a splash, but a trickle meant to sound like a mountain brook. Step onto the porch of the Talar. It is shaded, cool, and lofty. The ceiling above you is a geometric marvel of inlaid wood, painted in reds, blues, and gold leaf. This space is the throne of the garden. This is where the Shah would sit to receive foreign ambassadors from the Ottomans. The Mughals, the Europeans, imagine the psychology of this approach. The ambassador must walk the entire length of the 110-meter pool, exposed to the sun, while the Shah sits here in the deep shade, elevated and cool. By the time the ambassador reaches the throne, he is hot, dazzled by the reflection, and physically small against the grandeur of the columns. The garden is a weapon of statecraft. Enter the main hall behind the porch. The transition from the bright exterior to the interior is blinding. Your eyes take a moment to adjust. The walls are covered in frescoes. Massive paintings depict the glory of the Safavid dynasty. You see scenes of battles, the charge of the cavalry, the flash of sabers. See scenes of banquets dancing, girls, musicians, wine being poured from long-necked flasks. But look at the connection to the garden. The doors of this hall are not solid. They are windows, often made of fretwork or colored glass. Even when you are inside, surrounded by painted battles, you can see the green of the chinar trees and the flash of the water outside. The garden is the wallpaper of the room. There is a specific fresco here that tells a story of the garden's function. It depicts Shah Tahmasp receiving the Mughal Emperor Humayun. Humayun had fled India, defeated, and sought refuge in Persia. The fresco shows them sitting on a carpet in a garden. The Persian Shah is offering the Mughal Emperor fruit pomegranates and melons. This is not just hospitality. The language of the time, offering fruit from your garden was a sign of dominance. It meant, I control the water that grew this, control the land. You are eating my order. Humayun would eventually retake India, and he would take the Persian gardeners with him, planting the seeds that would become the Shalimar Gardens of Kashmir. But here in the paint, he is a guest in the Persian paradise. Let us step back out onto the porch. The sun has set. The air is turning that deep, luminous blue. This is the time when the Chelsotun reveals its second nature. It is a machine for light. Servants appear, moving like ghosts in felt slippers. They are carrying lamps, but they do not place them randomly. They place them in niches cut into the lower parts of the walls, behind the columns. The light shines upward, hitting the mirrorwork in the Muqarnas capitals of the columns. The mirrors catch the light and throw it back down, scattering it like stardust. From across the pool, the heavy wooden roof seems to disappear. The columns seem to be supporting a canopy of stars, and this floating constellation is reflected in the black water below. It is a moment of total suspension. Gravity, solidity, reality all dissolved into light and water. But beneath this ethereal beauty, there is a creeping problem. We must look at the flaws to understand the history. Walk back toward the pool. Look at the stone coping again. Do you see the white crust forming on the grout? Salt. The eternal enemy of the Iranian plateau. The water from the Zayande root is sweet, but the soil is saline. Every time the garden is irrigated, the water evaporates and leaves a tiny deposit of salt behind. Over centuries, this salt accumulates. It eats the brick. It crumbles the mortar. Burns the roots of the chinar trees. The gardeners of Isfahan fought a constant war against salinization. They had to flood the beds periodically to wash the salt down below the root line, but this required massive amounts of water. And in the late 17th century, the water began to fluctuate. The Safavid administration began to weaken. The Mirabatha water master became a political appointee rather than a skilled engineer. Bribes were taken. Upstream powerful landlords diverted water illegally. The flow to the Chelsotun lessened. The flush became less frequent. The salt crept up the trees. The algae bloomed faster than the carp could eat it. The silence of the garden, once a silence of peace, began to turn into the silence of stagnation. Stand here in the gathering dark. You can feel the fragility of the system. A garden is a high-maintenance act of defiance. It requires a strong king, a rich treasury, and a disciplined army of laborers. If any of those pillars shake, the desert waits to rush back in. We are approaching the end of the Golden Age. The Afghans are coming. The chaotic 18th century looms on the horizon. But before the fall, the Persian garden has one more transformation to undergo. It must move from the physical world of the king to the metaphysical world of the poet. As the palaces crumble, the garden will retreat into the verses of Hafez and Sadi. It will become an internal space, a geography of the soul. We must leave the Chelsotun. We must leave the royal pomp. We are going to travel south to the city of Shiraz, to the resting place of the poets. We're going to see a garden that is not about power, but about memory. The water there is not a vast lake for ambassadors to fear. It is a small stream for a lover to weep into. Turn away from the 40 columns. Walk back toward the gate. The reflection dissolves as the night wind picks up, rippling the water, turning the 20 columns back into a shivering blur. The illusion breaks. The history continues. The rigid, imperial lines of Isfahan are behind us. Now the vast, mirror-like pools, designed to intimidate ambassadors, and the thundering waterfalls meant to display hydraulic dominance have faded into the northern dust. We are traveling south now, crossing the desolate stretches of Fars province. The landscape softens. The harsh, jagged peaks of the Zagros give way to rolling hills, and the blinding white light of the high plateau mellows into a warmer, golden haze. You are entering Shiraz. It is the 18th or perhaps the 19th century. The timeline here is fluid, because Shiraz does not measure time by the reign of kings, but by the meter of poems. This is the city of nightingales and roses, the cultural heart that continued to beat even when the political limbs of the empire were severed. Here, the garden undergoes a fundamental shift. It ceases to be a projection of political power, palace garden, and transforms into a sanctuary of the Solamazar or tomb garden. The air here is different. Stop and inhale. It is thick, almost syrupy. It does not smell of dry dust or cool water alone. It smells of Bahari Naranj, the blossom of the bitter orange. In Isfahan, the trees were soldiers, rows of planes and cypresses marching in military precision. In Shiraz, the trees are hosts. We're standing at the entrance of the Hafizi, the resting place of Hafiz, the lyric poet whose works are found in every Persian home, usually placed right next to the Quran. But this is not a graveyard. Forget the Western concept of a cemetery with its somber rows of gray slate and manicured silence. The Hafizi is a pleasure garden where the dead are the guests of honor. The layout is symbolic. The garden is divided into two halves by a central colonnade. The southern half, where we enter, represents the material world. It is filled with acacia and orange trees, bustling with people, noisy, chaotic. You walk through this world pushing past sellers of fortune-telling cards and families spreading picnics on the grass. You climb a flight of stone steps symbolizing the ascension from the mundane to the spiritual and pass through the colonnade. Now, you are in the northern half, the spiritual realm. In the center, surrounded by a garden of meticulously maintained flowers, lies the tomb. It is covered by a pavilion, built much later, with a copper dome shaped like the hat of a dervish. Walk to the tomb. The stone sarcophagus is alabaster, carved with calligraphy so fluid it looks like the stone is melted. Look at the garden around it. The water here does not rush, does not jet into the sky, rests in rectangular pools, shallow and calm. It is water for ablution, for washing away the grit of the journey, both physical and metaphysical. The dominant plant here is the Naranj, the sour orange tree. The Shirazis have a specific relationship with this tree. It is an evergreen, so the garden remains green even in the dead of winter. But it is the spring, late April and early May that defines the city. The white blossoms open, releasing an oil so potent it can induce a mild headache if you sit under the canopy for too long. This scent is the invisible wall of the garden. It creates an olfactory enclosure as strong as any mud brick barrier. Watch the people. They do not march, they meander. They sit on the edges of the water channels, dipping their hands in. They open books. They read aloud. The soundscape of the Shirazi garden is unique. It is the sound of murmuring. Hundreds of people reciting poetry to themselves, to each other, to the water. The acoustic design of the garden amplifies this. The walls are high enough to block the city traffic, but the open spaces allow the human voice to carry without echoing harshly. It is a garden of literacy. Let us leave the Hafizi and move to a more domestic example of the Shiraz style. We must visit the Baghi Ramtha, Garden of Paradise. Here, we see the influence of the Khair dynasty, late 18th to early 20th century. The aesthetic has shifted away from the pure mathematical blues of the Safavids. Walk toward the main pavilion of the Iram garden. Look at the tiles on the facade. They are not just turquoise and cobalt anymore. There's pink, there's yellow, there is bright purple. This is the pink mosque aesthetic. The Qajar artisans were influenced by Victorian postcards and European imagery coming in through trade routes. You see tiles depicting not just geometric abstractions, but landscapes, hunting scenes, and even images of European ladies in crinoline dresses, reinterpreted by Persian ceramicists. The garden has become a gallery of worldly curiosities, but the structure remains ancient. The water flows from a spring high on the slope, rushing down through the main pavilion, literally flowing under the floor of the central hall and spilling into a massive pool flanked by date palms. Here we must appreciate the Sarvi Nesta Shiraz cypress. Look at the tall cypress tree standing near the water. In the Isfahan section, we saw the cypress as a rigid symbol of eternity. But the Shiraz cypress is different. It is a specific cultivar, Cupressus sempervirens, var. Seraphimus. It is incredibly tall, but it is not perfectly straight. It has a slight, gentle curve at the tip, a bows. In Persian poetry, this bent cypress is often compared to the posture of a lover bowing before the beloved, or a mystic bowing before God. It is a tree with humility. The gardeners here treat these trees with the reverence due to a grandfather. Some of these cypresses are 300-400 years old. They've seen dynasties rise and fall. Maintenance in the Qajar era becomes less about the grand hydraulic engineering of the past and more about the botanical richness. This is the era of the rose hybridizers.
Iras
is the capital of the Gali Mohammadi, the damask rose. Walk through the rose garden, the Golstan. The bushes are not manicured into tight balls, as in a French garden. They are allowed to grow somewhat wild, their branches intertwining. The harvest is a brutal, sticky business. It happens at dawn, before the sun hits the petals and evaporates the oils. Men and women move through the bushes, snapping the heads off the flowers. They carry the petals in sacks to the galebjir, the distillation shed. There, in copper stills, the petals are boiled. The steam is captured and cooled. The resulting rose water is the lifeblood of the city. It is used in the food, in the tea, in the washing of the tombs, and in the mortar of the buildings themselves. Yes, the architects would sometimes mix rose water into the mortar of the shrine walls. It is said that when the summer sun hits the bricks, the heat releases a faint ghost of the scent, years after the building was finished. Sit on a wooden bench near the water channel in the Aram garden. The sun is setting, casting the pink tiles into a deep, bruised violet. You notice a change in the technology of the water. In Isfahan, the fountains were gravity-fed miracles. Here in the 19th century, we begin to see the first clumsy attempts at modernization. Perhaps there is a cast-iron pipe replacing the ceramic tan bush. Perhaps there is a crude, steam-driven pump installed in a shed nearby, chugging rhythmically, forcing the water higher than gravity would allow.
Wow.
The Industrial Revolution is knocking on the garden gate. But for now, the mood is still deeply traditional. The garden is a place of kiv. Kiv is an untranslatable word. It roughly means pleasure, good spirits, or harmonious state of mind. But in the context of the garden, it means the specific act of doing nothing. It is the art of sitting by the water, drinking tea, eating a slice of melon, and watching the light change. It is not laziness, it is a passive activity of absorption. You are absorbing the baraka, the blessing of the garden. In Shiraz, the garden is designed to maximize kiv. The benches are wide and covered with carpets. The shade is deep. The sound of the water is tuned to a lullaby frequency. As the twilight deepens, the nightingales, the bulbul, begin to sing. This is not a cliché. The population of nightingales in Shiraz is dense. They thrive in the thick foliage of the orange trees. Their song is complex, loud, and frantic. In the silence of the 19th century night, before the roar of the automobile, the song of the nightingale would have been the dominant sound of the city. We must also acknowledge the role of the Andaruni, the private quarters in these later gardens. In the Qajar era, the separation between the public and private became even more ornate. The women's garden was often hidden behind even higher walls, accessible only through a twisting corridor. Here, the garden of the senses was taken to its extreme. Since the women could not leave the compound, the world was brought to them. The water channels in the women's garden might be lined with specific fragrant herbs, mint or wild oregano, so that when the gardener brushed against them, or when the water splashed them, the scent would release. The trees were chosen for the sound of their leaves. The trembling poplar, Populus tremula, was planted because its leaves flutter in the slightest breeze, creating a sound like rain even when the sky is clear. This is the garden as a musical instrument. But we are nearing the end of the era of isolation. The 20th century is approaching. The walls are about to come down, or at least they are about to be breached by a force stronger than the Mongols, stronger than the drought. The road, the modern asphalt road, is coming. It will cut through the old quarters. It will slice through the Chahar Bog. It will bring noise, exhaust, and speed. The contemplative silence of the Shiraz garden is about to be challenged by the radio and the truck. But before we witness the collision of the ancient garden with the modern world, we must make one final stop in the traditional timeline. We must look at the garden of the desert in its most extreme form. We must go to a place where there is no river, no mountain snowmelt, no easy water. We must go to the edge of the emptiness. we must go to Kerman and the Boggy Shazdatha Prince's Garden. It is the final, most dramatic statement of the Persian paradox, a green jewel set in a landscape of absolute, terrifying desolation. Stand up from the carpet-covered bench, shake the orange blossom petals from your lap. The nightingales are singing the sundown. We are moving east into the deep grit. We leave the fragrant, orange-scented embrace of Shiraz. We travel east, and the world begins to die. You are crossing the invisible border into the sphere of the Dashti Lut, the emptiness. The landscape sheds its softness. The rolling hills flatten into jagged, tectonic plates of gray and brown. The air loses its humidity, becoming dry and sharp, like inhaling crushed glass. We are heading toward Kerman. This is the frontier of the Persian garden. If Isfahan was the garden as a city, and Shiraz was the garden as a poem, then the place we are going, man, is the garden as a miracle. It is the late 19th century, around 1890. The Qadr dynasty is in its twilight, heavy with corruption and pomp, but still capable of one last, defiant gesture against the sun. You are standing on a dusty road, roughly 35 kilometers southeast of Kerman. The silence here is absolute. The sun beats down with a violence that feels personal. To your left, the snow-capped peaks of Mount Jupiter rise like a white wall, a taunting promise of cold in a furnace of heat. Ahead of you, floating in the shimmering heat haze, is a shape that does not belong. It looks like a rectangular spaceship that has crash-landed in the desert. It is a long, high-walled enclosure, stretching down the alluvial fan of the mountain. Inside the walls, you see the tops of trees, a dense dark green streak against the endless beige. This is the Boggy Shazdatha Prince's Garden. It was commissioned by Abdullah Mid Mirza, the governor of Kerman. He was a prince of the blood, a man of immense wealth, and by all accounts, a harsh, exacting ruler. He did not build this garden to live in. He built it to prove he could. Walk toward the entrance. The lower gatehouse, the Sirdar, is a monumental two-story structure made of brick and plaster. It is grand, imposing, designed to impress the traveler coming from the dusty road. But stop before you enter. Look up at the archway of the main gate. Look at the tile work. It is intricate, beautiful, Qadr, floral patterns, pinks, yellows, blues. But look closely at the band of tiles running across the top. There are gaps. There are patches of raw, white gypsum plaster where the tiles are missing. This is not damage from time. We're never there. The story is a piece of local legend that defines the spirit of this place. It is said that the prince was a tyrant, feared by his workmen. The master mason was up on the scaffold, finishing the tiling of the gate, when a horseman rode up from the city. The horseman shouted the news: "The prince is dead." The mason did not finish the row. He did not climb down the ladder. In a moment of pure, cathartic release, he threw his mortar bucket against the wall, smashed his trowel, jumped down from the scaffolding, and walked away. He left the gate unfinished. And so it remains today, a monument not just to the prince, but to the relief of his subjects. Push past the unfinished gate and step inside. The transition is the most violent we have yet experienced. In Pasargadi, the garden was open. In Isfahan, it was part of the street. Here, the garden is a fortress of climate. You are hit by a wall of cool air. The temperature drops 15 degrees in a single step. You are standing at the bottom of a long ascending axis. The garden is built on a steep slope, a gradient of roughly 4%. This is extreme for a garden, but necessary for the water. Look up! The garden stretches away from you, rising in a series of terraces toward a white pavilion, the Shoneh Shana at the very top, nearly half a kilometer away. Connecting you to that distant palace is the water. In the prince's garden, the water does not meander. It crashes. Because of the steep slope, the engineers could not use the gentle, glassy channels of Isfahan. They had to build a staircase of water. There are 9 waterfalls. It's 9 distinct drops where the water tumbles over stone lips, churning and frothing. Between the waterfalls are long, rectangular pools. Walk up the central path. To your left and right are the trees. But look at the species. These are not the delicate fruit trees of Shiraz. These are survivors. You see massive pines and cypresses, trees with needle leaves designed to retain moisture. They are planted in dense walls, creating a windbreak that protects the inner rows of fruit trees, peaches, apricots, plums from the scorching desert wind. The sound here is deafening. The roar of the water cascading down the 9 levels drowns out everything else. It is a white noise machine on an industrial scale. We climb. The path is steep. The air gets cooler as we ascend. We are walking upstream, toward the source. The water that feeds this garden comes from the Tigran Qanat, which taps into the snowmelt of Mount Jupiter behind the palace. This water is life itself. To dedicate the entirety of a Qanat's flow to a pleasure garden in a region where farmers fight over drops of water is an act of supreme arrogance. Notice the interplay of the earth and the architecture. The garden walls are made of mud, brick, and clay, the same color as the desert outside. From a distance, the walls camouflage the garden. It is only the green canopy that gives it away. Midway up the garden, stop and turn around. Look back toward the entrance gate. This is the forced perspective. The architects used the slope and the framing of the trees to create a viewfinder. Through the arch of the lower gate, you can see the infinite flat brown wasteland of the desert stretching to the horizon. You are standing in a lush, wet, green corridor, looking out at a world of death. The contrast creates a feeling of euphoria. You are safe. You are hydrated. You are alive. Continue to the top. We reach the Shineshan, the royal pavilion. It is a white 2-story building with a deep balcony. It sits like a crown at the apex of the garden. In the back of the pavilion is the pool where the water first emerges from the ground. It is crystal clear, freezing cold, having just traveled miles through the dark earth. The prince would sit here on the upper balcony. From this vantage point, the water flows away from him. He is the source. The water springs from his feet and gives life to the garden below, just as his authority flows down to the peasantry. But the prince is dead. The pavilion is empty. Walk around the back of the pavilion. Here the illusion ends abruptly. Literally 1 meter behind the back wall of the palace, the garden stops. There is a small ditch, and then desert. Rocks, dust, thorns. The transition is razor sharp. You can stand with 1 foot on the irrigated grass and 1 foot on the burning stone. This proximity to the wilderness makes the garden feel fragile. You realize that this whole structure of the waterfalls, the pine trees, the peaches, is a temporary struggle against entropy. If the Qanat collapses, this place will be reclaimed by the sand in a decade. The prince's garden is a folly in the truest sense. It is not an integral part of a city like Isfahan. It is a lonely, beautiful, stubborn imposition of will upon the landscape. Let us sit on the steps of the upper terrace as the sun begins to dip behind Mount Jupiter. The shadow of the mountain races across the desert floor, swallowing the garden. The air temperature plummets. In the high desert, the nights are freezing. This is when the Sheridoni come into play. Look along the edges of the main water channel. Spaced at regular intervals are small brick pedestals with niches. These are the lampstands. In the Qajar era, servants would place oil lamps in these niches. Because of the slope, if you stood at the bottom gate and looked up, the lamps would appear to merge into 2 continuous ribbons of fire, leading to the palace. Fire and water. The 2 primal elements, dancing together in the dark. The isolation of this place breeds a specific kind of melancholy. There is no city noise here, no coffeehouse chatter. Just the wind coming off the peaks and the relentless rushing of the water. It is a place for exile. Many Persian politicians who fell out of favor were sent to governorships in these remote provinces. The garden was their gilded cage. As you sit here, you can feel the weight of the history we have traversed. Started with the simple limestone channels of Cyrus. We moved to the enclosed sanctity of the medieval courtyard. We saw the grand urban planning of Isfahan. We smelled the poetry of Shiraz. And now, here in Mayhan, we see the garden as a survivalist. This is the end of the classical lineage. The 20th century is about to break the chain. The internal combustion engine is coming. The electric pump is coming. With an electric pump, you can put a fountain anywhere. You don't need a slope. You don't need a Qanat. You don't need the clever geometry of the Shoder Galio. You just need a switch. The clever design that defined 2,500 years of history, the passive cooling, the gravity engineering, the biological maintenance is about to be rendered obsolete by brute force technology. The garden will change. It will become a park. It will be paved with asphalt. The trees will be watered by rubber hoses. The silence will be broken by radios. We are about to leave the age of the bog and enter the age of the park. But before we let the modern world rush in, there is one more aspect of the prince's garden we must observe. Look at the water in the central pool again. It is dark now. Because the water here is moving so fast, tumbling down the stairs, it is highly oxygenated. It supports different life. The fish here are stronger, more muscular than the carp of the still pools in Isfahan. The ecosystem has adapted to the slope. And the trees look at the cypress trees again. They are the sarv species, but here they have grown differently. Wind from the mountain has shaped them. They're slightly twisted, leaning away from the peak, huddled together. They look like a congregation of monks in green robes, their backs to the storm, protecting the delicate water in the center. This image, the protection of the center, is the core truth of the Persian garden. Whether it is a mud wall, a row of trees, or a circle of mountains, the goal is always the same: to create a boundary. And inside that boundary, to create a perfect world. The prince is dead. The mason has gone home. The tiles are missing, but the water still falls. We must now descend the stairs. We must walk back down the 9 levels, past the roaring cascades, toward the unfinished gate. We are leaving the sanctuary. We are heading back to the road. The 20th century is waiting for us. Tehran is rising. Concrete high-rises are coming. The logic of the garden is about to be fragmented, chopped up into roundabouts and median strips. But the memory of the water remains. The silence of the desert has been broken. The gentle, rhythmic clink, clink, clink of the Mukani's pickaxe in the dark tunnel is gone. The soft splashing of the water over the stone lips of the chadar has been drowned out. A new sound has arrived. Listen. It is a rhythmic, chugging thud. Thump, thump, thump. It is the sound of a diesel engine. It is the sound of a pump. We have crossed the threshold into the 20th century. We are in Tehran, the new, sprawling capital of the Pahlavi dynasty. The year is perhaps 1935 or 1950. The timeline is accelerating. The slow, cyclical time of the seasons is being replaced by the linear, rushing time of modernization. Now you were standing on the edge of a street, but look at the street. It is wide, paved with asphalted black river that absorbs the sun's heat rather than reflecting it. Cars, mostly black sedans and heavy trucks, roar past. We are here to witness a divorce. 2,500 years, the Persian garden and the Persian city were married. The city was a collection of gardens. The garden was a microcosm of the city. Now they are being pulled apart. Reza Shah, the modernizing monarch, looks to the west. He sees the boulevards of Paris and the parks of London. He wants to impose this order on the labyrinth of Tehran. He orders the walls to come down. Watch as the high mud brick walls, the guardians of the baton, the inner sanctuary, are demolished. In their place come iron fences. This is a profound psychological shift. The garden is no longer a secret, it is a display. You can stand on the sidewalk and look through the iron bars at the roses. The privacy is gone. The mystery is evaporated by the sunlight. Walk with me into one of these new spaces. We are going to the Sodabad Palace complex, nestled in the foothills of the Alborz Mountains in northern Tehran. This is the summer residence of the kings. But look at the design. Where is the geometry? Where is the strict Chahorbag cross? Where's the axis? It is gone. In its place is the English garden style. The paths wind and curve in naturalistic loops. The trees are planted in clumps to look like a wild forest. Look at the ground. For thousands of years, the floor of the Persian garden was either paved with brick, beaten earth, or planted with low-lying clover and violets. Now, it is covered in grass. The lawn has arrived in Iran. This is a botanical invasion. Turf grass of Europe is not native to the Iranian plateau. It is thirsty. It is shallow-rooted. It cannot survive here on its own. To keep this carpet of green alive, the cleverness of gravity is no longer enough. You need pressure. Walk to the edge of the lawn. Look for the metal heads poking out of the grass. Hiss, click, 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 the sprinkler. The water is no longer a smooth, silent sheet flowing in a stone channel. It is atomized, sprayed into the air, fighting the evaporation rate. The smell of the garden changes. It no longer smells of damp clay and jasmine. It smells of wet cut grass and gasoline. The water source has changed too. We must go underground again, but not into the Qanat. We are going to the well house. In the corner of the garden, hidden behind a hedge, is a small concrete shed. Inside, the air is hot and smells of oil. A large black pipe rises from the floor. This is the deep well. The technology of the 20th century allows us to drill vertically, hundreds of meters down, piercing the ancient aquifers that the Connaughts gently skimmed. We are no longer harvesting the overflow of the water table. We're sucking the lifeblood out of the earth. Boom, the pump roars. It pulls the water up by brute force. This is the tragedy of the modern Iranian landscape. As thousands of these wells are drilled across the country, the water table drops. The ancient Connaughts, which relied on gravity, are left high and dry. They go blind. The Mukani puts down his pickaxe. His profession is obsolete. The veins of the earth that Cyrus the Great walked above are collapsing, turning into dry, dusty tunnels where only snakes live. But let us go back up to the surface. The garden has not disappeared. It has just mutated. We are moving from the royal palace to the public sphere. We are going to Park-e Shar the City Park. This is a new concept. In the past, there were royal gardens, private enshrines, semi-public. There was no park in the Western Sensa. Secular, open green space for the masses. Walk through the gates. The ground is paved with concrete. There are benches, wooden slats on iron frames. People are sitting on the benches. This is a change in posture. In a traditional garden, you sat on a tata-wide wooden bed, covered in rugs. You sat cross-legged, or you reclined. You were close to the ground. You are grounded. On the bench, you sit upright. Your feet are on the pavement. You are a spectator, not a participant. The layout of the park is a hybrid. There are fountains, yes, but they are electric. They jet high into the air, chaotic and splashy. There are flower beds, but they are planted with annuals, petunias, and pansies, imported from the West, rather than the perennial roses and tulips. And there are statues. Bronze men in coats, poets in turbans, standing on pedestals. The abstraction of the Sufi garden, where God was found in the reflection of a leaf, has been replaced by the literalism of the statue. But the most significant change is the north-south orientation of the new city. As Tehran expands, it consumes the old garden villas. The developers arrive. They bulldoze the Chahar Bagh courtyards. They build apartment blocks. Let us enter one of these apartments. It is 1970. You are in a living room on the 3rd floor. The window faces the street. But look at the back. The old courtyard has shrunk. It is now a small rectangle of asphalt in the back, used for parking the car. But look at the edges. There is a narrow strip of soil. A single lonely pomegranate tree stands there, dusted with soot from the city air. And look at the balcony. The Iranian need for the garden is genetic. It cannot be erased by concrete. The balcony is crowded with clay pots, geraniums, jasmine, a small lemon tree. The residents water them with a plastic pitcher every evening. This is the Baghi Moalak, the hanging garden of the middle class. The scale has collapsed. The 110-meter pool of Chel Sotun has become a fishbowl on the mantelpiece. The roaring cascade of the prince's garden has become a leaky tap. But the instinct remains. Let us look at the water feature of the mid-20th century home. The house. In the traditional courtyard, the house was a deep, sunken pool. In the modern era, it becomes a shallow concrete basin, painted a bright chemical blue. It often sits empty for months, filling up with dried leaves. It is filled only for the New Year Nowruz or for parties. It has become a symbol of a memory, rather than a functional climatic device. The air conditioning unit hangs from the window. It hums a drone that replaces the sound of the wind in the trees. It cools the air. Yes, but it creates a sealed environment. You no longer need the shade of the chinar tree to survive the afternoon. You just turn a dial. The relationship with nature has shifted from cooperation to insulation. But even in this era of concrete and steel, the Persian garden fights back. It survives in the cemetery. Go to Beheshti Zara, the vast cemetery of Tehran. It is a city of the dead. Look at the graves. Every grave is a miniature garden. The mourners wash the stone slabs with rosewater. They place vases of fresh gladiolus and tuberoses. They plant small bushes around the headstones. Even in death, the Persian soul demands to be surrounded by flowers and water. The cemetery is perhaps the largest maintained garden in the modern city. As the 1970s roll on, the city becomes hotter, louder, more crowded. The traffic jams, the traffic clog the streets. The carbon monoxide chokes the plane trees on Valiesser Street, the longest avenue in the Middle East, lined with chinar trees, a modern echo of the Chahor Bog. These trees are dying. Their roots are trapped under asphalt. They're drinking exhaust fumes instead of mountain water. The city is suffocating its own lungs. But then a shift occurs, a realization. Architects and historians begin to look backward. They see the crumbling mud walls of Yazd and Kashan, not as signs of poverty, but as signs of genius. They realize that the clever design, the passive cooling, the shade, the wind catchers, was actually more advanced than the electric pump. There's a nostalgia for the lost paradise. We are standing on the precipice of the revolution, but also on the precipice of a cultural reclamation. The modern park has failed to satisfy the spiritual hunger of the people. The bench is too hard. The fence is too aggressive. We need to find the water again. But where is it? It is bottled. Walk into a shop. You see rows of plastic bottles. Mineral water. The water that used to flow freely through the Jewy in the street is now a commodity, sealed in plastic, sold for a price. The democratization of water that Shah Abbas attempted with his stone codes has been reversed. Water is now a product. And yet, the resilience of the design is stubborn. Go to the carpet bazaar. Look at the rugs being woven today. Pattern hasn't changed. The diesel pump roars outside, but on the loom, the weaver is still creating the Chahar Bog. The four rivers still flow in wool. The cypress tree still stands eternal in silk. The idea of the garden has detached itself completely from the physical reality. The physical garden is broken, paved, and dried up. But the mental garden is pristine. We are nearing the end of our journey. We have gone from the king's vision at Pasargadae to the fragmented pots on a balcony in Tehran. We have seen the water flow, freeze, stagnate, and finally be bottled. But the story does not end in a traffic jam. It ends with a return. For the final section, we must look at the legacy. We must look at how this ancient design is being rediscovered today, not just in Iran, but globally. How the principles of the Qanat and the Paridesa are being studied by modern landscape architects facing climate change. We must go back to the source, but with new eyes. Stand on the balcony of the apartment block. Look out over the smog-choked city of Tehran as the sun sets. The neon lights flicker on. The noise is deafening. But close your eyes. Can you hear it? Beneath the traffic? Beneath the hum of the air conditioners? The ghost of the water is still there. The geometry is waiting to be uncovered. The roar of the diesel pump fades. The traffic of modern Tehran dissolves into the distance. We are moving one last time, traveling southeast, away from the smog, back into the deep desert. We are going to Yazd. This is the city of resistance. While other cities paved over their canals and replaced their mud bricks with concrete, Yazd held on. Had to. In the middle of the salt desert, where the summer temperature hits 45 degrees Celsius in the shade, you cannot fake survival. You cannot rely on a glass box and an air conditioner alone. If the power goes out in a modern building here, it becomes an oven within the hour. But the old houses, they breathe. We are standing before the Bagi Daladabad. It was built in the mid-18th century, but it feels timeless. Look at the skyline. It is not dominated by minarets or skyscrapers, but by Badger's wind catchers. Yeah, they look like chimneys, tall brick towers with vertical vents at the top. The one before us is the tallest in existence. It rises 33 meters into the scorching sky. It is an octagonal finger of adobe pointing at the sun. This tower is the final piece of the puzzle. We have spent hours looking at the ground, at the water channels, at the roots of the trees. Now we must look up. The Persian garden is not just a hydraulic machine, it's an aerodynamic one. Walk into the pavilion beneath the tower. The air inside is moving. You can feel it on your skin. It is not the cold, artificial blast of an AC unit. It is a gentle, rhythmic breeze. Here's the genius. The wind catcher grabs the slightest breeze from the upper atmosphere, wind that doesn't exist at ground level, and funnels it down the chimney. As the hot, dry air descends, it passes over a stone basin of water at the bottom of the tower. The dry air hits the water. Evaporation occurs instantly. The heat is absorbed by the phase change of the water, and the air becomes cool and humid. It flows out into the room, pushing the hot, stale air out through the opposite doors. You are standing inside a natural refrigerator. No electricity, no freon, just geometry, wind, and water. And this is the clever design brought to its absolute zenith. It is a collaboration between the earth, the mud brick, the sky, the wind, and the aqueduct, the water. It is here in this cool, dim octagon that we can reflect on the legacy of what we have seen. In 2011, the world finally officially recognized what the locals had known for 3 millennia. UNESCO inscribed the Persian Garden onto the World Heritage List. They chose 9 gardens: Pasargadi, Chel Sotun, Fin, Iram, Shazda, Daladabad, and others to represent the diversity of the design. But a list is just paper. The true legacy is in the DNA of the world's landscapes. Think about where we have been. The Chahar Bagda, fourfold garden. That design did not stay in Persia. It traveled west to Spain. If you walk through the Alhambra in Granada, you are walking through a Persian garden translated into Andalusian stone. The Court of the Lions, with its crossed water channels, is a direct descendant of the designs of Cyrus. It traveled east to India. The Mughal emperors, descendants of Timur, took the concept and exploded it into marble. The Taj Mahal is not just a tomb, it is a sharbag. The mausoleum sits at the end of the garden, not the middle. The principle is the same. The water mirrors the building, doubling its beauty. It traveled to the modern world. Today, as we face a warming planet, architects are returning to these blueprints. They are looking at the Qanat and seeing a model for sustainable water management. They are looking at the Badger and seeing a model for zero-carbon cooling. The Persian Garden is no longer a relic of boring history. It is a blueprint for the future. It is a survival guide. Let us walk out of the pavilion and into the long promenade of Daladabad. The pine trees here are incredibly tall, lining the main water axis. The perspective is dizzying. The water channel stretches out for hundreds of meters, a silver arrow pointing to the horizon. But I want you to look at the water one last time. Really look at it. Throughout this journey, we have treated the water as a physical substance to a flowing through stone. But in the Persian worldview, water is memory. There is a belief that water can hear, that it holds the vibration of the place it passes through. The water in this channel has traveled from the mountains. It has flowed through the dark silence of the Qanat, listening to the earth. It has emerged into the light, listening to the nightingales of Shiraz, the poets of Isfahan, the prayers of the Sufis. It carries the memory of the empire. Sit on the edge of the channel. Put your hand in the water. It is cold. It connects you to the snow on the peaks, 50 kilometers away. The garden is a device for connection. In a world that is increasingly fragmented, digital, and fast, the garden forces you to be slow. It forces you to be biological. You cannot scroll through a garden. You have to walk it. You have to smell it. Close your eyes. Let us reconstruct the sensory landscape one final time. Remember the smell of the wet dust at Pasargadi, the scent of raw creation. Remember the sound of the Chadar waterfall in the Timurid tent, the white noise of the textured stone. Remember the flash of the blue tiles in the Isfahan sunshine, the turquoise mirror. Remember the scent of the bitter orange blossom in Shiraz, the heavy sweet perfume of the poet's tomb. Remember the chill of the wind catcher in Yaz, the breath of the architecture. All of these elements combine to create a specific frequency, a low resonant vibration that settles the nervous system. This is the gentle hum. It is the sound of a system in balance. It is the sound of humans living in a hostile world without destroying it. It is the sound of stewardship. The sun is setting now in Yazd. The desert sky is turning that impossible shade of deep bruised indigo. The first stars are appearing. The lights in the garden are turning on. But they are not the harsh floodlights of the city. They are soft golden lamps placed low in the foliage. The reflection in the long pool deepens. The windcatcher tower is mirrored in the water, shivering slightly in the breeze. You are safe here. The wall protects you. The water sustains you. The tree shades you. This is the promise of the Paradisa. It is the promise that if we are clever, if we are patient, and if we respect the limits of the earth, we can build a paradise anywhere in the middle of a salt desert. The water flows on, spills over the stone lip at the end of the channel, disappearing into the darkness of the orchard to water the pomegranates. The cycle continues.